I sat there in seat 2A, feeling the deep, cool press of the buttery leather against my back. You know that kind of tired, where your bones feel like they're made of lead. That was me. I'd just spent 72 hours in a windowless boardroom in Chicago, hammering out a merger that was going to change the lives of 3,000 employees. My tie was loosened. My top button was undone. And all I wanted, all I truly craved, was a glass of sparkling water and 5 hours of silence as we cut through the clouds toward Atlanta. The cabin had that quiet, expensive hum. You know, the one. The smell of warm nuts, high-end coffee, and the faint scent of sterilized air. It's a sound that's supposed to mean you've made it. You've put in the work. You've climbed the mountain, and now you get to breathe the thin air at the top. But for a man who looks like me, even when you buy the mountain, people still look at you like you're just there to mow the grass. I was staring out the window, watching the ground crew move like ants on the tarmac, when I felt it, that prickle on the back of your neck. You don't even have to see it to know someone is standing over you with a question they've already answered in their head. Sir, the voice was sharp. It wasn't the welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling voice I usually get. It was the you're in the wrong neighborhood voice. I didn't turn around right away. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the bubbles sting my throat, trying to keep my peace. I'm a CEO. I deal with high-stakes conflict for a living. I know how to keep my heart rate down. But man, sometimes the weight of the suit isn't enough to hide the target on your chest. Sir, I'm talking to you. I finally turned my head. There she was, mid-30s. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Actually, she wasn't even trying to smile. She was looking at my wrinkled dress shirt and my tired eyes. And she didn't see the man who just signed a 9-figure deal. She saw a mistake. Can I help you? I asked. I kept my voice low, deep, grounded, the way my father taught me. Never give them the anger they're looking for. He'd say, if you give them fire, they'll use it to burn you down. The economy boarding is through the other door, sir, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the plane. You're blocking the path for the first-class passengers. They need to get settled. I looked at the empty seat next to me. I looked at the glass of water, the other flight attendant, a younger guy who had actually checked my boarding pass at the door, had given me 5 minutes ago. I am settled, I said. She didn't miss a beat. She didn't even look at the seat number. Sir, please don't make this difficult. We have a very full flight today. I'm sure you just got confused by the boarding groups. If you head back through that galley, the crew in the back will help you find your seat in row 44 or wherever you belong. Now, I want you to stop right there. I want you to really think about that word, belong, before I go any further. I want to ask you something. I want you to be real with me. Have you ever walked into a room, a place you worked your tail off to get into, a place you paid for with your own hard-earned sweat, and felt every eye in the room tell you that you were trespassing? Have you ever had to hold your breath just so you wouldn't scream because someone assumed the worst of you before you even opened your mouth? If you know that feeling, drop a yes in the comments right now. Tell me where you were. I want to hear your story, because I'm starting to think the higher we climb, the more they want to pull the ladder out from under us. I looked at her, and for a second, I wasn't a CEO anymore. I was that 18-year-old kid in North Philly again, getting followed around a grocery store while I was just trying to buy milk for my mom. It's a gut punch. It's a soul ache. It's the kind of heart-wrenching pain that doesn't leave a scar you can see, but it thumps in your chest every time you try to stand tall. I'm not confused, I said. my voice as steady as a rock. "My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm in 2A. This is 2A." She scoffed. An actual, audible scoff. She tucked her clipboard under her arm and put a hand on her hip. "Sir, I've been doing this for 10 years. I know who flies in first class. This seat is reserved for a high-priority traveler. Now, for the last time, I need you to move your bags and clear the aisle before I have to call the lead purser." The cabin went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. I could feel the heat rising in my collar. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a guy in 3C, silver hair. Expensive watch. Look up from his Wall Street Journal. He didn't say anything. He just watched. He watched to see if I was going to fold. He watched to see if the big man was going to get humbled. I felt that old familiar heat in my blood. That raging fire that makes you want to stand up and show them exactly who you are. But I took a breath. I thought about my daughters. I thought about the 3,000 people whose paychecks I just secured. I wasn't going to give this woman the angry black man she was so clearly fishing for. I reached into the pocket of my blazer, which was draped over the armrest. My fingers felt the crisp edge of the paper. I didn't rush. I didn't scramble. I moved with the kind of deliberate, slow grace that comes from knowing you're right. I pulled out the ticket. The paper was slightly crinkled from being in my pocket, but the bold letters at the top were unmistakable. First class, seat 2A. It was right there in black and white. I held it up, but I didn't hand it to her. Not yet. I wanted her to look at it. I wanted her to see the Group 1 printed in the corner. I wanted her to see the Emerald Status logo that meant I'd flown more miles with this airline than she'd probably spent on the ground in her life. She didn't lean in. She didn't squint. She just stood there, her face hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated defiance. It wasn't about the ticket anymore. It was about her not wanting to be wrong. It was about her needing me to be the person she thought I was. "I don't care what that paper says," she whispered, leaning down so only I could hear, her breath smelling like peppermint and bitterness. There must be a glitch in the system. "I'm telling you, this seat is occupied. You need to move, or I will make sure you never fly this airline again." She reached out her hand, palm up, demanding the ticket, like I was a child who'd stolen a piece of candy. I looked at her hand. Then I looked her dead in the eye, feeling the last bit of my patience evaporate like mist in the sun. I slowly placed the ticket into her palm, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. And I watched her fingers clinch around it as she turned toward the computer terminal at the front of the galley. I watched her back as she retreated toward the galley, my boarding pass gripped in her hand like a weapon she didn't quite know how to fire yet. The silence in the cabin didn't just grow, it solidified. It became a physical thing, a thick, suffocating fog that settled over the first-class seats. You could hear the distant, muffled thud of suitcases being shoved into overhead bins back in coach. But up here, in the land of hot towels and porcelain plates, the only sound was the frantic, rhythmic tapping of her fingers on that computer keyboard. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes for a second, trying to find that center, that quiet place I go to before a hostile takeover or a high-stakes board meeting. But it was hard to find when I could feel the heat of a dozen stares burning into the side of my face. It's a specific kind of heat. It's not the warmth of curiosity. It's the cold, sharp radiation of judgment. I felt the woman in seat 2B, the one with the stiff, bleached blonde bob and a pearls and pastels outfit that shouted country club membership, shift in her seat. She didn't just move, she recoiled. She pulled her designer tote bag closer to her legs, tucking it away as if I were a pickpocket waiting for the lights to dim. She sighed, A long, exaggerated sound designed to let everyone within 3 rows know that her afternoon was being personally ruined by my existence. "This is just ridiculous," she muttered, not to me, but loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Some of us actually have places to be. Important places. We shouldn't be held up because of clerical errors." She didn't use a slur. She didn't have to. The way she lingered on that word, errors, while glancing at my hands that have built companies from the dirt up, told me everything I needed to know. It was a microaggression, a tiny needle prick intended to remind me that no matter how much I paid for this flight, I was an error in her world. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a glance. I kept my eyes on the ceiling of the cabin, thinking about the invisible suit my father used to talk about. He was a man who spent 40 years working in a steel mill, coming home with soot in his lungs and grease under his fingernails. He used to tell me, "Son, when you walk out that door, you've got to wear a suit they can't see. You've got to be twice as polite, 3 times as smart, and 4 times as patient as the man next to you. Because for them, your mistakes aren't just mistakes, they're proof." I was wearing that invisible suit now, and it was feeling heavier than the wool blazer draped over my arm. The flight attendant came back. She didn't come alone. Beside her was a man in a crisp navy uniform with 4 gold stripes on his sleeve, the lead purser. He didn't look like he was there to solve a problem. He looked like he was there to remove a nuisance. He had that rigid, bureaucratic posture of someone who spent his life following the book without ever wondering who wrote it. "Sir," the purser said, standing over me. He didn't use my name, even though he was holding my ticket. "There seems to be an issue with your reservation. This seat is showing as unassigned in our current manifest update, and we have a Diamond Medallion member who has been cleared for this specific spot." "Check again," I said, my voice vibrating with a low, tectonic force. "I booked this seat 6 months ago. I checked in 24 hours ago. I walked through that door, and your colleague confirmed my seat. The issue isn't the manifest. The issue is the eyes looking at it." The flight attendant's face flushed a deep, angry red. "I told you. There's a glitch. You're being incredibly difficult, and you're making the other passengers uncomfortable. Look at everyone. You're causing a scene." I looked around. I wasn't the one raising my voice. I wasn't the one standing in the aisle waving a piece of paper. I was a man sitting in a chair. But in their narrative, my refusal to disappear was the scene. "He's right. You know." The woman in 2B chimed in, her voice pitched high with performative anxiety. "It's a safety issue at this point. If he's not supposed to be here, he needs to go. I don't feel comfortable with the flight departing until this is resolved." Who knows how he even got that ticket? There it was. The safety card. The ultimate weapon. If you want to get rid of a black man in America, you don't say you don't like him. You say you're afraid of him. You turn your prejudice into a concern for security. The purser leaned down, his shadow falling over me. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to gather your belongings and move to the galley so we can discuss this quietly. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to call airport security and have you removed for failing to follow crew instructions. That's a federal offense. Think about your career. Is a seat in 2A worth a prison sentence?" The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. He was telling me to think about my career, while he was actively trying to dismantle my dignity. He was threatening me with the very system I had spent my life navigating, trying to use the law as a leash. I looked at the woman in 2B, who was now nodding along, a smug, "I told you so" smirk playing on her lips. I looked at the flight attendant, who was clutching her clipboard like a shield, and then I looked at the purser, I didn't see an authority figure. I saw a man who was terrified of a world where someone like me didn't have to ask for permission. "You want to call security?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry more weight than his threats. "Call them. But before you do, you might want to consider the paperwork that's going to follow. You might want to consider why this glitch only seems to happen to the man in 2A and not the woman in 2B. The purser's eyes flickered. For a split second, I saw a shadow of doubt cross his face. He knew. He knew exactly what this was, but the momentum of the lie was already too fast to stop. He reached for the interphone on the bulkhead, his thumb hovering over the button that would bring the police onto this plane. "Fine," he said, his voice cold and final. "Have it your way." As his finger pressed down, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The rising action had reached its peak, and the invisible suit I was wearing didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like armor. I reached into my bag, not for my luggage, but for the one thing they weren't expecting, the power to change the gravity of the entire room. I gripped my phone tightly, feeling the cold glass against my palm, and waited for the sound of boots on the jet bridge. The sound of those boots hitting the floor of the jet bridge was a rhythm I'd heard too many times in my life. It's a hollow, metallic thud that carries the weight of authority and the promise of a cold, hard ending. Every passenger in the first-class cabin seemed to hold their breath at the same time, creating a vacuum of silence so thick you could almost taste the salt of the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the blue light of a dozen smartphone screens. They weren't just watching anymore. They were documenting my downfall. They were waiting for the moment I finally broke, waiting for the angry man to emerge so they could justify everything they already believed about me. 2 officers stepped through the door, their belts jingling with the tools of their trade, handcuffs, radios, things meant to restrain and silence. They didn't go to the purser first. They didn't look at the woman in 2B who was practically vibrating with a mix of fear and excitement. They looked straight at me. It's that look, you know. The one that skips over your humanity and lands directly on your potential as a threat. "Is there a problem here, sir?" the taller officer asked, his hand resting casually, yet purposefully, near his hip. The purser didn't wait for me to speak. He stepped forward, his voice suddenly sounding like a practiced script. "Officers, this individual is refusing to vacate a reserved seat. He's been uncooperative, argumentative, and he's causing a significant disturbance that is delaying the flight. We've asked him to move to the galley to resolve this, but he's refusing to follow crew instructions. Argumentative, uncooperative, disturbance. Those are the magic words, aren't they? They're the ingredients for a narrative that ends with a man in my skin being dragged down an aisle while people cheer. I looked at the officer, and I didn't see a villain. I saw a man who was being fed a lie and was more than happy to eat it. "I'm not being argumentative," I said, keeping my hands visible on the armrests. My fingers spread wide so there could be no misunderstanding. I am sitting in the seat I paid for. I have shown my ticket. The glitch is in their attitude, not their system. The woman in 2B couldn't help herself. She leaned forward, her phone aimed directly at my face. "He's been threatening the staff. He told them they'd regret it. We don't feel safe. Just get him off so we can go." That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't a snap. It was a quiet, cold realization. It was like a light turning on in a dark room. I realized that even if I won this seat, even if I sat here for the next 5 hours, I would be breathing the air of a cabin filled with people who wanted me gone. I would be served by a crew that saw me as a problem to be solved. And I would be supporting an airline that allowed this to happen. Why was I fighting to stay in a house where I wasn't welcome? I looked at my phone. It was sitting in my lap. A small slab of glass and metal that held more power than anyone in this cabin realized. I didn't feel the heart-wrenching pain anymore. I felt a cold, surgical clarity. I am the CEO of Sterling Global. I am a man who moves markets. And yet, I was sitting here, letting a flight attendant who hadn't read her own manifest treat me like a trespasser. "Officer," I said, my voice dropping into that deep, resonant tone I use when I'm about to close a deal that everyone said was impossible. "I'm going to make a phone call. I suggest you wait until I'm finished before you do anything you can't undo. Sir, you need to put the phone down and stand up," the officer said. Stepping closer, I didn't put the phone down. I swiped the screen and hit a contact I'd had for over a decade. His name is Robert. He's the chief operating officer of this very airline. We played golf 3 weeks ago in Pebble Beach. We talked about his kids' college funds and the new sustainability initiatives my firm was funding for his fleet. The phone rang once, twice. The purser was reaching for my arm. His face twisted in a sneer of triumph, thinking he'd finally caught me in a disobeying orders trap. "Hello, Marcus." Robert's voice came through the speaker. Clear and familiar. I didn't take the phone off speaker. I wanted the silence of that cabin to absorb every single syllable. "Robert," I said, looking directly at the purser, whose hand froze mid-air. "I'm currently sitting in seat 2A on flight 1422. Your lead purser is currently trying to have me removed by airport security because he claims there's a glitch and I don't belong in first class." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence that felt like a storm brewing. "He's doing what?" Robert's voice was no longer the friendly voice from the golf course. It was the voice of a man who realized his company was about to hit a brick wall at 200 miles per hour. "He's standing right here," I continued, my voice calm, almost conversational, along with a flight attendant who has spent the last 20 minutes making sure every passenger on this plane knows I'm a mistake. "Now, Robert, you know, I don't like to make things personal, but this feels very personal. So, here's what's going to happen. You know that $20 million corporate travel contract Sterling Global has with you, the one we were supposed to renew on Monday." The purser's face went from a triumphant red to a sickly, translucent gray. The flight attendant's clipboard slipped a few inches in her grip. "Marcus." "Wait," Robert started. His voice panicked. "It's gone. Robert. I'm canceling it effective immediately. My 3,000 employees will never step foot on one of your planes again. But that's not the main issue right now. The main issue is my dignity. And your crew has decided that my dignity isn't worth the price of this seat." I stood up. I didn't wait for the officers to tell me to. I stood up slowly, towering over the purser, who looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. I looked at the woman in 2B. She had stopped filming. Her phone was lowered, her mouth slightly agape. "Now, Robert," I said, my voice echoing in the dead-still cabin. "Remind your purser about the lease agreement for this specific aircraft. Remind him who actually holds the secondary charter rights for this tail number during this fiscal quarter." I heard Robert let out a breath that sounded like a groan. "Marcus, please, tell him. Robert, the aircraft is under a dry lease agreement with a subsidiary of Sterling Global." Robert's voice crackled over the speaker, sounding small and defeated. "Technically, Marcus, you're the one providing the plane for this route today." I looked at the purser. I looked at the officers. I looked at every single passenger who had spent the last half hour hoping to see me humiliated. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. The floor had completely dropped out from under them. "You wanted me off this plane because you didn't think I belonged," I said to the purser, my voice like a hammer hitting an anvil. "Well, you were right. I don't belong here. I don't belong in a place that treats people like me as an inconvenience to be managed. But here's the thing about owning the lease. If I'm not welcome, then nobody is." I took the phone off speaker and put it to my ear, but I didn't take my eyes off the purser. The raging fire in my blood had turned into a steady, controlled burn. I could feel the sweat on the purser's forehead, the way his eyes were darting around, looking for an exit that didn't exist. He had started this as a clerical error, but I was ending it as a lesson in accountability. "Robert," I said into the phone, my voice cold and final, "empty the plane. I want every single passenger, every crew member, and every bag off this aircraft in the next 10 minutes. If this airline doesn't want my presence in 2A, it doesn't get my plane on the tarmac. Cancel the flight. Now." I clicked the phone shut. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of tension anymore. It was the silence of a vacuum. I sat back down in seat 2A, not because I wanted to stay, but because I wanted to watch the world I had just dismantled begin to scramble. I crossed my legs, adjusted my cuffs, and looked out the window as the first officer's radio began to crackle with the frantic, high-pitched orders coming from the tower. The crackle of the intercom wasn't the usual polite chime of a flight attendant preparing for takeoff. It was sharp, distorted, and heavy with the kind of static that makes your teeth ache. When the captain's voice finally broke through, it didn't have that calm. "We're cruising at 30,000 feet rhythm." It was a voice that sounded like it had just been dragged through a bed of hot coals. He announced that due to an unforeseen contractual dispute regarding the aircraft's operation, the flight was canceled. Everyone had to deplane immediately. No exceptions. No delays. I watched the realization sink into the cabin like ink dropped into a glass of clear water. It started at the front, with the purser and the woman in 2B, and rippled all the way back to row 50. The silence I had created just moments ago didn't break. It shattered into 1,000 pieces of frantic, ugly noise. The woman in 2B, the one who had been so concerned about safety and proper procedures, was the first to lose her mask. The phone she'd been using to document my supposed disturbance was now clutched in a trembling hand. "You can't be serious," she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that set my nerves on edge. "I have a merger meeting in Atlanta. This is illegal. You can't just kick us off because of him." She pointed a manicured finger at me, but I didn't even blink. I just watched her. I watched the way her face contorted when she realized that for the first time in her life, her uncomfortability didn't carry any weight. Her designer bags, her pearl necklace, her status, none of it could buy her a single minute more on this plane. She had spent the last hour trying to make me feel small, and now she was looking at the reality of her own insignificance in a world governed by the very power she thought I lacked. The purser was in a different kind of hell. He wasn't yelling. He was paralyzed. He stood near the cockpit door, his eyes fixed on the floorboards, his hands twitching at his sides. He knew that the phone call I'd made didn't just end a flight. It ended his trajectory. In this industry, you don't recover from costing the company its largest corporate account because you couldn't be bothered to read a manifest, or worse, because you chose to see a person's skin before you saw their seat. "Sir," one of the police officers said, his voice much softer now, almost respectful. He wasn't looking at my hip anymore. He was looking at my eyes. The captain has requested everyone clear the cabin. Do you need assistance with your bags? I've got them, I said. I didn't move yet, though. I wanted to see the exodus. It was a slow, bitter parade. One by one, the passengers who had whispered, stared, and judged had to stand up, grab their carry-ons, and walk past me. Some of them looked at the floor. Some of them tried to offer me these weak, apologetic half-smiles that made my stomach turn. It's amazing how fast people find their empathy once they realize you're the one holding the keys to the kingdom. The Karen from 2B had to shuffle past me to get to the aisle. She stopped for a split second, her eyes wet with frustration. I hope you're happy, she hissed, her voice cracking. You ruined everyone's day over a seat. You're just as arrogant as they say. I leaned forward just an inch, letting the cold light of the cabin reflect in my eyes. I didn't ruin your day, ma'am, I said, my voice as smooth as polished glass. I just gave you a front row seat to the consequences of your own silence. You didn't care about the glitch until it started affecting your schedule. That's not my arrogance. That's your mirror. She huffed and stormed off, her heels clicking a frantic, angry beat on the floor as she vanished into the jet bridge. Finally, the cabin was empty. It was just me, the two officers standing by the door, and the purser who still looked like he was waiting for a ghost to swallow him whole. The air felt different. It was lighter. The thick honey of the tension had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, echoing space that felt like a sanctuary. I stood up and grabbed my blazer. As I walked toward the door, I stopped in front of the purser. He didn't look up. You know, I said, not out of anger, but out of a weary kind of pity. My father worked 40 years in a mill, so I wouldn't have to carry the soot he did. He taught me that respect isn't something you earn from people like you. It's something you demand by simply refusing to be moved. You thought you were protecting your cabin. All you did was expose how empty it really was. I didn't wait for a response. I stepped out of the plane and into the jet bridge. The air in the terminal was buzzing with the chaos of the canceled flight. But I walked through it like I was in a different dimension. I saw the lines forming at the customer service desks, the red-faced businessmen shouting into their phones, the families sitting on their suitcases. It was a mess, a $20 million mess. As I reached the gate area, I saw a young man in a fluorescent vest, a ground crew member, maybe 22 or 23. He was leaning against a pillar, watching the chaos with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. He saw me walking toward him, and our eyes met. He didn't know who I was, but he'd seen the police go in, and he'd seen the entire flight come out in a panic while I walked out last. Calm and composed, he gave me a slow, subtle nod, a brother-to-brother acknowledgement that bypassed the suits, the money, and the corporate contracts. It was a look that said, I see you. I know what just happened. I stopped and reached into my pocket, pulling out a business card. I handed it to him. If you're ever looking for a career change, son, somewhere where the only thing that matters is how hard you work and how you treat people, give my office a call. The look on his face was worth more than the first-class ticket. It was a spark, a reminder that the reason I fight these battles isn't just for my own comfort. It's so that 20 years from now, a kid like him can walk into seat 2A, and the only question he'll be asked is if he wants lemon in his water. I walked toward the exit, my shoes echoing in the vast, vaulted ceiling of the airport. I felt a shattering sense of peace wash over me. I hadn't gone to Atlanta. I hadn't made the meeting. But as I watched the sun set over the tarmac, I realized that I'd closed the most important deal of my life today. I'd proven to myself, and to everyone watching, that the invisible suit isn't a burden, It's a badge of honor. I'm sitting in my car now, looking at the city lights, thinking about you. Yeah, you, the person listening to this right now. I want you to take a long, hard look at the seats you're sitting in. Are you letting people tell you that you don't belong? Are you letting them move you because you're afraid of the scene? Listen to me. Don't you ever give them the satisfaction of your disappearance. Justice isn't always a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes, justice is just sitting still when the world tells you to run. It's making them deal with the reality of your existence until they have no choice but to change. If this story touched your soul today, if you've ever had to fight for a seat that was already yours, I want you to hit that subscribe button. Join this community of truth tellers. We don't just tell stories here, we reclaim our power. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is one seat in your life you are refusing to give up? Let's lift each other up, because at the end of the day, the price of the seat is high, but the price of your dignity is immeasurable. I'm Marcus Sterling, and this was my truth. Until next time, stay strong, stay visible, and never, ever let them move you. Video ends with a slow fade to black and the Unseen Sky Truths logo. The Monday morning after the flight, the air in my office felt different. Usually, the city sounds of Atlanta, the sirens, the distant hum of traffic, the construction are just background noise. But that morning, the silence inside my glass walls was deafening. I was sitting at my mahogany desk, the one my wife says is too big for a single man, staring at a letter on thick, cream-colored stationery. It was from the airline's board of directors. They weren't just asking for a meeting. They were pleading for one. You know, there's a specific kind of silence that follows a storm. It's not a peaceful silence. It's the silence of people holding their breath, waiting to see if the roof is going to cave in. My phone had been ringing off the hook since Friday night. Robert, the COO I'd called from seat 2, had sent me 17 text messages. Most of them started with Marcus, please, and ended with, we can make this right. But how do you make right the feeling of being erased? How do you put a price tag on the moment a man is told he doesn't belong in a space he bought and paid for? I walked into their boardroom at 10:00 a.m. sharp. I didn't wear the wrinkled blazer from the plane. I wore a charcoal gray suit, hand-tailored, with a silver silk tie. This was my war suit. When I walked into that room, I didn't see people. I saw a system. There were 12 of them sitting around a table that looked like it cost more than a small house in the suburbs. Robert was there, looking like he hadn't slept since 2019. Next to him was the CEO, a man named Henderson, who had a smile that looked like it had been surgically attached to his face. Marcus, thank you for coming, Henderson said, standing up and reaching across the table. I didn't take his hand. I just sat down, pulled my cuffs, and looked him dead in the eye. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where everyone is being nice to you, but you know, deep down, they're only being nice because they're afraid of what you can do to their bank account? It's a hollow feeling. It's like eating a meal made of air. If you've ever felt that fake corporate kindness, drop a truth in the comments. I want to see who else has had to navigate these shark-infested waters. Henderson continued, his voice dropping into that faux empathetic register. And we are absolutely horrified. The flight attendant and the purser have been terminated. We've also flagged the passenger in 2B for a lifetime ban. We want to offer Sterling Global a 5-year extension on your contract at a 40% discount, plus a personal apology published in the New York Times. He paused, waiting for me to be impressed. He thought he was giving me the moon, but he didn't realize I already own the stars. Is that the price of my dignity? Henderson, I asked. My voice was low, vibrating through the table. 40% off a ticket to be humiliated. Marcus, we're trying to move forward, Robert chimed in, his voice desperate. I leaned forward. You want to move forward, but you haven't even looked back. You fired 2 people. Great. You banned a Karen. Wonderful. But you didn't ask why that flight attendant felt comfortable enough to ignore my ticket in the first place. You didn't ask why the purser felt he could threaten a CEO with federal charges without even checking his own computer. You've got to rot in the foundation. Henderson. And no amount of discounts is going to fix a house that's built on prejudice. The room went cold. I could see the sweat on Henderson's upper lip. I wasn't just talking about a plane ride anymore. I was talking about the invisible wall that exists in every one of their offices. I was talking about the glass ceilings they pretend don't exist. I don't want your discount, I said, standing up. And I don't want a public apology that's written by a PR firm. What I want is for you to look at the people you're hiring. I want you to look at the training you're giving them. Because if a man like me, a man with my resources and my connections, can be treated like a criminal in broad daylight, I can only imagine what you're doing to the young kid in 44E who doesn't have the CEO of the airline on speed dial. I walked out of that boardroom without signing a single piece of paper. As I waited for the elevator, Robert ran out after me. Marcus, you're throwing away $20 million over a principal, he shouted. I turned to him as the elevator doors opened. I gave him a small, sad smile. No, Robert, I'm spending $20 million to remind you that some things aren't for sale. You can keep the money. I'll keep my seat. As the doors closed, I felt that shattering sense of peace again. The invisible suit felt light. I realized that my power didn't come from the merger I'd closed in Chicago. It came from the fact that I was willing to walk away from anyone who didn't see me for who I truly was. 3 weeks had passed since the day the world saw me sit in 2A and refuse to budge. The video had gone viral, millions of views, thousands of debates. I'd become a symbol, which is a heavy thing to be when you're just a man trying to get home to your family. I was sitting in a small, quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, far away from the glass towers and the high-stakes boardrooms. I was waiting for someone. About 10 minutes later, a young man walked in. He was wearing a clean white t-shirt and jeans, but I recognized him immediately. It was the ground crew member from the airport, Tyson. He looked nervous. He was twisting his cap in his hands, looking around like he was afraid he was in the wrong place. I waved him over. Tyson, glad you called, I said, pointing to the chair across from me. He sat down on the edge of the seat, as if he was ready to run at any second. Mr. Sterling, I didn't think you'd actually show up. I mean, you're the guy on the news. I laughed. A real, deep belly laugh. I'm just a guy who was tired of being told where to sit. Son, tell me, how's the airport? Tyson looked down at his hands. They fired the purser. And the lady, she's gone too. But the atmosphere, it's weird. Mr. Sterling, people look at me differently now. Like they're afraid I'm going to call someone and shut the whole place down. He looked up at me, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was a question. Why did you give me that card? I was just a guy on the tarmac. I didn't do anything. You did everything, I said, leaning in. You saw me, when everyone else was looking at me like I was a problem. You looked at me like I was a man. You gave me that nod. That was the only thing that kept me from losing my temper that day. You were the bridge between my world and the world they were trying to shove me back into. I want to pause here for a second. Have you ever had a moment where a complete stranger gave you a look or a word that changed the entire direction of your day, maybe even your life? We spend so much time looking at the big people, the CEOs, the politicians, that we forget the real power is in the hands of the people who keep the world running. If you've got a Tyson in your life, someone who saw you when you felt invisible, tell me about them in the comments. Let's give them their flowers. Tyson. I continued. I grew up in row 44. My father spent his whole life in row 44. I worked my way to the front of the plane, but I never forgot the smell of the air in the back. The problem is, once you get to first class, you start to believe that you're separate from the people on the tarmac. You start to think your suit is a shield. I took out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside was an offer for a management trainee position at Sterling Global. It included a full scholarship for his final 2 years of college and a starting salary that was 3 times what he was making at the airport. Tyson stared at the paper. His hands were shaking. I can't take this. Mr. Sterling, I don't know anything about mergers or corporate contracts. I don't need you to know about contracts, I said. I can hire 1,000 lawyers for that. I need someone who knows how to look a person in the eye and see their dignity. I need someone who knows that the person in the last row is just as important as the person in 2. I'm not giving you a handout. Tyson, I'm making an investment. Because the next time I'm on a plane, I want to know that the people running the show are people like you. Tyson looked at me for a long time. Then, he slowly picked up the pen and signed the paper. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The look on his face, the look of a man who just realized the invisible wall had a door in it, was enough. We walked out of that coffee shop together. As we stood on the sidewalk, the sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the street. I felt a thumping sense of pride in my chest. That airplane ride was a nightmare. It was a heart-wrenching pain that I'll carry for the rest of my life. But as I watched Tyson walk toward his car, standing a little taller, moving with a little more purpose, I realized that the pain was the price of the progress. I'm back in my office now, looking at that mahogany desk. I've got a new airline contract to sign, a different company, one that spent 3 hours showing me their diversity and inclusion data before they even mentioned the price. I'm sitting in my seat, and this time, I'm not just sitting for myself. I'm sitting for Tyson. I'm sitting for my father. And I'm sitting for you. Don't let them move you. Not from your seat. Not from your dreams. And not from your truth. Because when you stay still, you give everyone else the permission to stand up. I'm Marcus Sterling, and the story doesn't end here. It's just beginning. Subscribe. Come on. And remember, the view from the front is better, but the ground beneath us is what matters. Stay strong.